Tonight I'd like to do the 18th chapter of Mesilas Yesharim, to overview the first paragraph or so, and then to do quite a bit of text. It is one of the most fascinating sections of Mesilas Yesharim, because Mesilas Yesharim is known as a Musar Sefer. What is a Musar Sefer? Dear friends, what is a Musar Sefer? Very good. There's straight halacha, to do or not to do. There's obviously plenty of Torah scholarship, Chumash, Gemara, whatever. Musar is discipline to make sure that we're on track and doing it right. So the 18th chapter of all topics is Beveyor Midus HaChasidus, to explain how to be a Chasid. And you could imagine that in the 18th century, 17th century, when the concept of Chasidus was just starting, they chose this term because historically the word Chasidus meant to be truly connected to Hashem. And the question is, what does it take to be truly connected? And what the Mesilas Yesharim does in the very early part of this chapter is he emphasizes that he will dispel certain myths regarding Chasidus. He says there are plenty of people who think that Chasidus is dependent on saying many requests, many confessions, crying a lot, bowing a lot, and rolling in the snow. I guess it depends on your climate. Rolling in the hot Sahara desert sand doesn't have the same ring to it. But he says, Lo al eila nosad hachasidus klal. These are not what really define Chasidus. These are all side effects. That if a person is truly troubled by a shortcoming, that he may say a very long confession. I remember in yeshiva, Yom Kippur time, some people spend time on the regular vidui, as it's printed in the machzorim, and some people had printed for themselves special long lists of all the wrongdoings known to mankind. And my Rosh Yeshiva at that time, in the yeshiva that I was, took a look at these long, long lists, and he shrugged and said, "Oh, the major league sinners." Just like somehow dispelling for us, like it's not quite required, or it's not quite required. Where does that fall into place if it helps you connect? And if you find that the regular vidui is too vague and it leaves you empty, so then you need to do that, the longer one. But it's not really required. But it is not the essence of saintliness. It's not the essence of Chasidus. If a person does the long vidui but hasn't changed, then nothing happened. That long vidui, it's almost like it would be better if you would sit on the vidui yourself and arrive at your own list of things that you think you ought to be confessing on Yom Kippur, rather than taking the long list from somebody else, as great an accomplishment as it was for them to compile it. It's not really an expression of saintliness on your part, unless you truly connect. For some people it does. For some years it does, and other years it doesn't do it for you. Whatever works. But it's a result, not a compelling requirement. What is the essence of Chasidus? So I'm right now on page 216, if you're in this edition of the Mesilas Yesharim with the translation. And on the 6th line, I believe, Unva'er ata, let us now explain how Chasidus works. And this is really the essence of the Musar movement, going the extra mile on behalf of a mitzvah. He writes, Hine shoresh ha-Chasidusu, the essence of Chasidus, is Masha Amru Zal, what our rabbis described, Ashrei Odom Sha'amalo b'Torah, praised or lucky is the person who toils in Torah, V'osa nachas ruach liyotzro, and brings pleasure to his creator. Listen to the end of that statement. The point of the mitzvah is that Hashem should be pleased with it. Why else would someone do a mitzvah? I'm required. This person is not doing it because he's required. That's pathetic. Woman serves supper. She doesn't want to get divorced. Come on, guys. We could do better than that. Why is she serving supper? The pleasure. She cares. Why is a person learning Torah or doing mitzvahs? I don't want to get punished in Gehenna. You think we can do better than that? Why are you doing mitzvahs? Because I know Hashem's proud of when I do mitzvahs. I know Hashem has joy when a human being is challenged, and with the strength of Torah, he comes through anyway. No say nachas ruach liyotzra. The ha'inyan, what's the concept? Hinei mitzvahs hamutolas al kol Yisrael. The mitzvahs that were given to Klal Yisrael are known. They're all quantified. How much matzah to eat, how much to drink from the grape juice. How much in Lashon Hara you're not allowed to say. Everything's quantified. Lo yishtadel v'yechave lifter atzma b'masha kvar mefursam min hachova. He's not just satisfied to absolve himself based on what is obvious. Ela yikra k'moshe yikra es ben ohiv ohiv. But instead he wants to be like the child who loves his father. You know your father loves something. Excuse me. And you love him, so you don't satisfy yourself with the bare minimum. I know dad needs a little fresh air. Okay, so we'll put him in a wheelchair. We'll get him fresh air. I think you had enough. Let's go in. It's a gorgeous day. Let's enjoy it. Let's go for a walk. I'll enjoy your company, etc. If you know that your father likes something, your father lets you know just with a little hint. I wish I could have some raspberry tea. Oh. Now that I know, what do I do with that information? I'm all into it. I'm going to get you the raspberry tea. I'll even get you other herbal teas so that you have a choice. Because maybe it's not just raspberry. Maybe, can I have some help here? Chamomile, mango. What's that?
Rose chicken.
Rose, very good. The child is going to increase everything according to what he's now aware of. Even though his father never really said it as an order, but he knows now that it's important. He says, we see this with our own eyes between every beloved relationship. Bein ish leishto, between a man and his wife. Bein av uvno, between a father and a son. And vice versa, the son to the father. Anytime the love is real, you just intimate that it's important, and the other person jumps on that awareness. Now, I want to pause here for a moment from the text of the Mesilas Yesharim and point out, as I like to do, one of the challenges that we have in making this practical. And this is called the Mashal Nimshal challenge, where a sefer tells you straight out, just as the mashal, just as the analogy, it's a parable. And that's how it's supposed to take place in your relationship with Hashem as well. Right? Just as a spouse jumps to do the right thing, just as a son and a child, just as beloved friends, so too, if I know that Yerushalayim is important to Hashem, so I'm davening for Yerushalayim, even if I don't totally understand what Yerushalayim is all about. I know it's important to him. He wants to rebuild that Beis HaMikdash for us. He wants to have that love palace between. It's important to him. Do I really understand what a Yerushalayim is, what a Beis HaMikdash is? I'm trying, right? The Chafetz Chaim Heritage Foundation put out a virtual Beis HaMikdash on the last Tisha B'Av video, so that at least you could see the concept of majesty of such a ornate building. But basically, I know from Hashem that it's important, so I try to connect with it, and it's important to me too, because it's important to him, even if I don't fully understand. I know that Torah is important. I know that shalom, peace between Jews, is important. So I'll go the extra mile, right? But he's proving this from an analogy that unfortunately itself has to be reinvigorated. He's proving, just as a husband-wife jump to do each other's bidding. Is that true in our society? Just as a father and a son and a son and a child jump to do each other's bidding. Right? We live in a world where the word love is used primarily regarding the foods that I love to eat. They did a write-up not long ago on divorce in the Jewish community of young couples, which is very disconcerting. 6 months into the marriage, 18 months into the marriage. And one of the questions they posed, which they believe should be posed to everyone in pre-marriage counseling, is what do you expect to get out of the marriage? Because apparently after 6 months, if you're not getting it, you're going to be disillusioned. Now, imagine if people had the perspective that the Mesilas Yesharim is describing, to do each other's bidding, to bring pleasure to the other person, which is what we're familiar with based on Rev Dessler, that the word ahava finds its root in the word have. Thank you. 2 points. Have, to give. That ahava, love, means to give. That's what generates it, and that's what defines it. That's what lets you know that it's really there. If you're willing to give, that's love. Love is not that you're turning me on. Love is that you're a person that has enough appeal to me that I'm willing to give to you. Either I like your qualities, or I guess perhaps I like your looks, whatever it is, but I'm willing to give to you. Someone once defined love to me: after you've had a fight, you could look at that person and say it's worth making up. Ava is the willingness to give. Imagine if you would ask a person, what do you expect to get out of this marriage? And they would answer, I expect to get out of this marriage the opportunity to give. Interesting. The opportunity to be patient. Like this, my roommate in yeshiva, in seminary, my roommate does something I don't like, I just turn them off. But over here, I'm looking forward to having to deal with the person. The opportunity to give emotionally, physically. So then we would be on to the mashal that the Mesilas Yesharim is describing. But this is what I call the mashal nimshal challenge. The Mesilas Yesharim takes it for granted that there is a dedication in life that you will identify with, and we merely have to transfer that sense of dedication and tell you that's how your relationship with Hashem ought to be as well. But we first have to clarify where in our lives we see that dedication. In ourselves and the people around us. Give me examples of it. Someone told me they have a child that's a little bit challenging. So the parents went on vacation and they told the child, no beer parties. You could have your friends over, no beer parties. So the kids went out and bought wine. I don't find that an expression of love. You told me what not to do, so I didn't do it. You tell a kid, please stop using the word stupid in your conversation. Next thing you hear, he's using the word idiot instead. Where did that leave us? Dedication means you intimate to me what kind of reason, what would you like to see? And I know right away what kind of relationship you're describing. So to a certain extent, we're in a challenge nowadays that we have to work on the mashal first. And then you could transfer it to the nimshal, to the lesson that the Mesilas Yesharim wants us to get. I see in the margin of my Mesilas Yesharim, a quick example, also cute. We all know you have to stop for the school bus. Red lights are flashing, the stop sign is extended, you have to stop for the school bus. And then you have somebody who, the yellow lights were flashing, not the red lights. And therefore I don't have to stop. And therefore he whizzes by the school bus going 50 miles an hour. Well, the law didn't say the speed limit, not a problem. But that's not what was described. On page 218, Shalo Yomar, the first line, a person should not say, Lo nitztavesi yoser. I wasn't commanded more than that. Dali b'masha nitztavesi befeirush. It's enough what I was commanded to openly. That's what I have to keep, and not more. And essentially, this is what Musar is, and this is what he's describing as Chasidus. Any time that a person changes strict law and makes it into a relationship, that's what we're looking to do in terms of mitzvahs. You have this, I think, most often regarding Shabbos. Both before Shabbos, working down to the last minute, and on Shabbos, the things we're allowed to do, the things we're not allowed to do. A person can easily say, but Rabbi, where does it say technically that I'm not allowed to? right? A person goes jogging publicly on Shabbos, in shorts, schwitzing away. What do you want from me? The Walkman. I turned it on before Shabbos. There's an Eruv. I could still hear the echo of my Rebbe's voice thundering during Musar Seder. He says, there's no Eruv to play basketball on Shabbos. The Eruv doesn't work for that. Technically, I don't know, we could discuss technically. Organized sports doesn't work. You have teams. It's a destination. So the rabbi may choose to keep quiet because it's better that the people are hanging out there than elsewhere. But it doesn't fit the Mesilas Yesharim standards of relationship because it's not in the spirit of the law. I think that very often when we deal with Shmiras Halashon, we enter into this topic as well. Technically, the person might not be protected by Shmiras Halashon laws, the person we want to speak about. You want to speak about someone in the Polish parliament. You come up with somebody that you want to speak about. My Rebbeim were always against racial jokes. Always against them. And they used to say, I don't know if it's mutter according to halacha or it's asur according to halacha, but it's not a good idea. It's not what Hashem created the world of. You have to make fun of something. So sometimes you have to discredit something. You have a basketball star who everybody is hero worshipping, and then he gets an illness that is typically found among people of immoral conduct, and you find out that indeed he didn't get it from a blood transfusion. He got it from immoral conduct. And that after every basketball game, there's a lineup of choices. So you want to discredit that role model to your children. So the Chafetz Chaim says you're allowed to use jokes in order to discredit, if that's what you need to do. But just for entertainment, people who are different than us to do racial slurs, I don't know if it's Shmiras Halashon or not, but it doesn't fit Mesilas Yesharim standard. So Jewish people making fun of themselves is very dangerous, and I think it's often, well, I mean, it depends when. There is a certain amount of humor that it's, just self-joking humor. But there are comments which I believe are actually the equivalent of Lashon Hara against the community, which is very severe. I came across somebody recently who made a comment to a group of school children that Jews don't spend money. They don't like to spend money. They're cheap. Yeah? Now, I'm sure we've heard this comment. If you've been around long enough, you've heard every comment, whether they're true or not. My wife heard the comment, and she thought for a second, and she said, that's an interesting thing to say about observant Jews. We're cheap. You know what we pay for kosher? You know what we pay for tuition? You know what we pay to make a beautiful Shabbos and a beautiful Yom Tov? What does it mean we're cheap? Oh, what you wanted me to spend my money on, I chose not to. Oh, that's true. That's true. I didn't go to Orlando. You wanted me to? I didn't go on the cruise that you wanted me to go on. That's true. You're going to hold that against me and call me a cheap Jew? We spend. We just spend differently than you might have anticipated. Ask the flower store, Erev Shabbos, if the Jews are cheap. The Jews spend. I don't think that's a fair comment. Even said by a Jew. Oh yeah, you know we guys are cheap. I don't think you're allowed to say that. I don't think it's true. I think it's an unfair comment against the community. So I don't know exactly which, we do have a joke, which I think is sometimes very useful. The joke, Jewish time. So that if someone's late, and you don't want to make a whole fuss out of it, so there's like this joke that people come on different schedules, kind of thing. In some circles, you call a Sheva Brachas for 7:30, and they mean 8:30. And in other circles, 7:30 means 7:25. They expect you to be milling around ready to wash at 7:30. That is the start time, isn't it? And you get people who come to one simcha anticipating the other. And we have this joke to kind of just buffer it. Oh, we meant 7:30 Jewish time. So I don't know that that's meant to be disparaging. That's just kind of meant to say, like, we have different ways of looking at things. I'm not sure that that's bad. But if it's derogatory, I suspect that it's just as restricted as anything else. Maybe there's a certain amount of understanding that it's a joke. I don't know if people are so understanding, especially when you do it cross social brackets, where you talk about those people's chandeliers. That segment of society is ostentatious. I don't think you're allowed to do that. So, yeah, I do think it's delicate. Certainly something, according to Mesilas Yesharim, for sure, that we need to be aware of.
There's a comment that came in when we were talking about, doing what Hashem wants, the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law and what's meant. And it reminds her of tznius. When the girls say, it's okay by halacha, when it's really just the minimum requirement for the sleeves, like just past the elbow instead of the longer sleeve or skirt a little bit longer. Well, by halacha, it's just the right length, but it's not the whole, what's really meant, what are you really trying to accomplish?
It's certainly a very good example. I would add a comment to it, though, that sometimes when something is barely the right amount of length, it's actually not long enough. Because when the person stretches or does other things that they're doing in public, at a Shabbos table, let's say, when it's mixed company, when they claim it's acceptable length, and it's just barely getting it when they're in a certain position, you kind of know that when they're stretching to hand the salad to the next person, that they're no longer going to be covered. And likewise, unknowingly, plenty of women wearing a dress skirt that's bare minimum when they're sitting on a couch, you'll forgive me, but they end up not being covered, and it doesn't work. So that may or may not be an accurate example. I would use the tznius example a little bit more comfortably regarding the styles and the different applications, where it does become much more delicate. Imagine a person, man or woman, is totally covered properly, whatever the rules are, but has trinkets, so many of them, that everything keeps clanging as they walk, calling attention to them. Yes, man, woman, I don't even care. It's no longer the message of tznius. And you have other examples. certain types of amazingly contrasting bright colors. Again, man or woman. These are valid questions to ask of someone that you trust. Is this too much? Now, I'm a big fan of color, so don't get me wrong. This black craze that hit the frum world for the past 18 months or so is not to my liking. And when they told me that purple is the new black, I wasn't exactly turned on to that either. I think that people need color just for serenity, just to keep your mood upbeat. I think that it's just like lighting is important, I think color is important. But be that as it may, there will be examples of color overdone. And that would be an example of, am I within the message of the law or not? But definitely there will be applications of length, etc., which have to do with whether you were being sensitive to the message or not. Yes. Well taken. Anything else from our wise people in virtual land? Okay. They're translating it as saintliness. I don't have a better English translation, but if you do commentary on it and you appreciate, Chasidus means a person with a real relationship who's willing to do more than the letter of the law requires in order that he can have the relationship. I don't know where the word saintliness comes in or doesn't come in, because I think some of these words are abused, just like the word awesome is abused. I believe that McDonald's at one point told you that if you came to them, you would get an awesome burger. I'm not sure how that fits in to the first, the first bracha of Shemona Esrei, where we describe Hashem as being awesome. So some of these words, you just don't know how they... This is, by the way, a trend. This is very clear. The advertising agencies are aware that our generation is spiritually deficient and craving. And therefore they use word associations with whatever they're marketing that have to do with religion type words. If you pay attention to it, you'll notice it, that they're using religion-based words to describe things, just as 30 years ago they were using love-based words. People who love their families bank with us. Associations, now they're using religious-based words. But the person who wants the relationship for real, they're calling the word saintly. Again, I'm afraid of the word, really. But it means to be willing to do beyond the letter of the law in order to have the relationship.
It is a relationship with Hashem. Because a lot of times when you read, for example, if you're reading a book about different rabbis during the 18th century, right? A large Polish city or shtetl would have a yeshiva, and there would be rebbe, and they would be calling, so the Hasidim of this rabbi. This is, so the
they called themselves a chassid.
Correct, but not just chassid of this particular. So the relationship that described is not really to do with Hashem. This is the relationship of a teacher and a follower or a student. So that was always my impression when that word is used.
So in all fairness, we got to do some history and back up to clarify that. It started off with the chassid that the Mesilas Yesharim is describing. Mm-hmm. And that was the original usage of the word. When they wanted to start this movement, they called it the Hasidic movement. Presumably the message was, let's not continue doing Judaism by rote and experiencing it on a boring level, which was the problem of the day. Instead, let's have Hislavus. Let's get excited. Let's get into it. Let's sing and dance and express ourselves that this is joyous. They called the movement Chasidus. The people who adhered to it were called Hasidim. Now, once they had their name, depending on where they connected, who was their mentor, it became Hasidim of Satmar, Hasidim of whoever, right? They are not hero worshipping the Rebbe, we hope. This is a Litvak, Misnagid background person talking, right? But they're not worshipping the Rebbe. That was the big complaint that many Jews had. It looked like they were worshipping the Rebbe. I don't mean literally worshipping idol, but making him into such a role model that almost like, we don't have to study Torah. As long as the Rebbe has a good connection with Hashem, I'm okay. And we want every Jew to be thriving. But there's no question, they did not intend it that way. They were not being a chassid of the Rebbe. They were being a chassid of Hashem. And their connection was through the name of this Chasidus from whatever city it emanated. So that really does require clarification. They're not being a chassid of the Rebbe in the Chasidus that the Mesillas Yesharim is talking about. In the expression, he's a chassid, so then yeah, he's a chassid of that Rebbe. It results, you're correctly identifying a misnomer in the Jewish world, and we have to realize that the word chassid has two different connotations. One is service of Hashem, and one is part of the movement that adopted that name. Yeah.
How is it not adding on to Torah doing more in
Ah, very nice. We have a prohibition in Torah not to add on to Torah. So the question is, if I'm adding on, it wasn't required by the letter of the law, so why isn't that a violation of Baal Tosif of adding on? Anybody want to volunteer an answer?
Even though we say this is attitude, it's the reason for it.
Very nice. Attitude, an enhancement. The actual fact is that Baal Tosif is only going to be prohibited if you give the impression that you're adding to the actual mitzvah. In other words, if tefillin has 4 boxes, and that's what it has, and you add a 5th, that's Baal Tosif. But if a woman's, and she starts off with 2, and then says, I love Shabbos, and I'm thankful that I had children, and I'm adding another 1, and another 2, and another 3, there's no Baal Tosif there. There's no such prohibition.
What about end of Shabbos time? Everybody goes to a different time, so let's make it an hour and a half later.
Right.
Just
So you'll find that generally whenever we enhance a mitzvah, there's a basis for it. There is basis because we're required to add to Shabbos in its beginning and in its end. And there's no exact amount of time given to how much we add before and after. So a person with more dedication who wants to display more love for Shabbos is going to add more. Now even that requires Das Torah, how much to add. You could have absurd, I make up, 90 minutes. Sounds like a good number. My lucky number always was. Yeah, and that's not what we're looking for. The shittas that we have of how much to add is because there are different opinions in the Rishonim when the end of Shabbos is. So even though we don't paskin like those shitas, we don't paskin in our country generally 72 minutes. We don't paskin that. But it's mentioned in the poskim that since there is such an opinion, when it comes to Shabbos, because of the holiness of Shabbos and the expression that we love Shabbos, we extend it. So follow that rule. And that's where someone who held that amount would come from. Someone who holds less, 50, is also, it's based on shitas. It's not just pulled out of the hat. And they're different amounts, but they're invariably, they're based on something. But I think the simple response is that when you're enhancing the mitzvah, I'm not adding to the mitzvah. I'm enhancing the mitzvah. I'm showing the mitzvah is beautiful and dear to me, so that you're allowed to do, that you're supposed to do. That shows that you care about the mitzvahs, that you're not doing it mitzvahs anoshim milumada, out of habit. You'll remember, for example, that in the Tochacha, Parshas Kisavo, it specifically says, because you did not serve Hashem, b'simcha u'v'tuv leiv, with happiness. Instead, you did it cold. The Torah itself prohibits cold observance. It's supposed to be a relationship. The person would eat the matzah and not have any emotional connection with what Hashem did to us, for us, and just concentrate on stuffing it down and getting out of here. So then they didn't do the mitzvah the way it was supposed to be done. Let's move on to the handout. Laws of Rechilus, based on a section in chapter 1. Now you remember Rechilus is relating information that may be true and may be nothing negative about it, but it is going to cause pain to somebody else. From their perspective, it was the wrong thing to do. It was a hurtful thing to do to them, and by telling them it was done, it'll cause problems. So paragraph 5. In the prohibition of Rechilus, there is no difference whether the speaker offered to tell the information voluntarily or whether someone pressured him to tell what was said about them. This is true even if it's the speaker's father or mentor. This is very important. There's a misunderstanding that some people think that Lashon Hara laws change if someone asked me. There may be some very advanced cases of information that you're only going to relate if you're asked specifically. But for the most part, both what you're allowed to tell and what you're not allowed to tell has nothing to do with whether the other person is asking you for that information. If it's forbidden even if they ask you for it. If it's supposed to be told because you know they could get damaged, it's supposed to be told even if they don't ask you. Person interested in a shidduch didn't ask you, was the man previously married and did he get divorced because he beat his wife? He never asked you. If you know that information and you trust the people you're talking to, you're supposed to tell them that information even though they never asked for it, because it's clearly a damaging piece of information that they need to know about. Obviously, in the world of constructive Lashon Hara, if the guy went for counseling, okay, we'll get sophisticated separately. But if that's the fact, whether they ask or they don't ask makes no difference. They're going to get damaged, and you have an obligation to save them. No different than seeing a person drowning in the pool, even if the person in the pool doesn't say, Mrs. So-and-so, can you please save me? Even if they don't have the presence of mind to scream help. But you see them drowning. you have a moral obligation to save them. Number 6, even if one realizes that by not revealing the information, they would take a significant loss, Torah prohibition, you still have to be willing to take that loss. Now, obviously, it's far better to be creative, and he does give you a little bit of leeway in terms of being creative. You don't have to lose your job every single time a Lashon Hara issue comes up. And you learn to sidestep the issue without giving the information. Let's skip to 8. Regarding what a person should respond when he's asked, what did that person say about me? If he can reply in a way that is not a real lie, and thereby avoid rechilus, he should do so. If he realizes that his fellow will not accept such an answer, he's allowed to lie to preserve the peace, but he should never swear falsely. You sidestep it. In the sources, there's a comment here. For example, Hashem only repeated part of what Sarah said, I am old, and Hashem did not repeat, I and my husband are old, because Avram, even at the age of about 100, doesn't want to hear that he's old. Not from his wife. So Hashem doesn't repeat it, because it's rechilus. Now, did Hashem repeat the entire quote in its entirety with accuracy? No. And that's an example of changing mipnei darkei shalom. You don't have to say the whole truth and nothing but the truth and the entire truth and lay it on thick so that lots of people get hurt. You use responsible seichel to know what to do. Now, we're not going to be able to get into it in depth, but just to observe, in the work setting, there might be cases where the boss is entitled to the information. If he has people out there demoralizing the staff, and he asks you, what's going on? Well, everybody's critiquing the way you don't want people stealing pencils from the stockroom. And you instead, being very, very frum, no one's saying anything. It's not so clear, because he may be entitled to that information, and it's constructive. You're going to have to figure out who's right, again, as we started a few years ago, who's right according to Torah law. And then figure out whether you're supposed to say or you're not supposed to say. But if you're not supposed to say, and it's just that it's your boss and therefore there's pressure and leverage, so then he's giving you license to sidestep it according to certain parameters in order to preserve the peace. Any questions?
And the the guy is not too smart. The person doesn't have to reveal that information to the person asking for a reference.
I think what's commonly done among shadchanim is that they couch the information in a positive way. Instead of saying they're dumb, they figure out in the lingo of shadchanim how to say it in a way that only if it appears to be very important to you will you pick up on that information. In other words, nothing to do with Lashon Hara. I'm just looking out for your good. If you're dealing with someone who's extremely bright and has very little patience for people who are not, and they're looking very clearly, in their opinion at least, for a very bright spouse, and you know that this person isn't, right? So there are two approaches here. One is, well, I'm not sure that they're correct in wanting such a bright spouse. There are plenty of very nice shidduchim that are made between one person being bright and the other person being very pleasant, then I think they're doing themselves a disservice. And maybe I know better than them, and that's the typical shadchan who tells you go out anyway, and sometimes they win and sometimes they lose. It's a gamble. Sometimes people are very resentful. I told you I didn't want XYZ. Why did you set me up with XYZ, right? But then there's the other, which is much more straightforward, that if that's what they want, and I give them the credit of knowing what it is that they need, then yes, I have an obligation in a pleasant, non-confrontational, not disparaging way to let them know that this person doesn't match that particular criteria. You have a girl who's 6 feet, and she insists on a husband who's taller than her. You could argue with her if you want, and I'm not saying what's right and wrong, but there are two approaches. You could argue with her, or if you accept her assumption to be factual, and that's what she needs to be happy, then you do need to tell her that she's wasting her time in not so many words by going out with someone that doesn't fit the criteria, and maybe just be open with them. Tell them, in my opinion, I think you could be very happy marrying somebody who's half an inch shorter than you. And many shadchanim would say, and many rabbanim would say, just trick her. Tell her that he's taller than her. Like change the license. Let the license say 6'2". And they'll live happily ever after. But if you know that it's really something that's legitimate, they can't handle someone who's sloppy. Maybe they'll find out on a date, or maybe even worse, they're going to find out during the marriage and be miserable. Because it's a serious condition in this particular case. You're obligated to tell them.
You're only obligated if you are aware that it's important to them, otherwise you don't have to say it.
I don't know why someone would purposely report that a different person is a B student as opposed to an A student, unsolicited in the context of shidduchim. I don't see any reason to report every fact if it's not relevant. Right? We once gave the case, the father lost his job. Is that relevant to the child's shidduch? In other words, according to Torah law, I'm not asking what will be on the street. On the street, he might not be able to afford the kind of chasna I had in mind if he just lost his job. I don't want someone who's kvetching about finances. Yeah, but in Torah law, is that relevant on the child? No. But you could make it relevant in the world of Lashon Hara. Oh, did you hear? The father just lost his job. As if, and this somehow is something that should scare me off, so I'll get scared off because you told me I should get scared off. No, not every piece of information that's known should be reported. No. On that note, happy speaking. Speak constructively and bring pleasure to those around you. Decent motto, decent goal. We hope to meet again in 2 weeks. And please try to stay up to date with the 5-minute segments by email and comment if you would be so kind. I think it's very useful to have that added reinforcement during the weeks, especially those that we're not meeting. Thanks for joining. Have a wonderful week.